Good evening. Good evening. And thank you, Mr. Kevin Smith, and thank you, Joshua, along with my co-host, Mr. Leonard Gildari. Good night to you, Len. Hope
Good
you're
night,
good.
gentlemen. I see the men are
Ladies and
very
gentlemen,
early.
all across Guyana, the Caribbean, and the wider world, we welcome you once again to Room 592, where we unleash the truth. As you know, over the past couple of weeks, we have had quite some distinguished fellow of various fraternities appearing in the hot seats in Room 592. And tonight we have two other distinguished gentlemen who have certainly come out emerging like stars in the Guyana night skies. And these two gentlemen, they have certainly taught this public that we can speak out from an independent platform, and we can teach a new beginning for terms like integrity, honesty, ethics, and political decency. And ladies and gentlemen, as I welcome Mr. Lennox Shuman and Mr. Timothy Jonas to our program tonight, I want to remind you all that D-Day is quickly approaching. And with D-Day being just a couple of days away, we must be prepared for anything between now and then. And as we get our program started, we are going to discuss what we can foresee, what's the best case scenario of things that can happen. And of course, given the experience of these two gentlemen within the Recount Center at the Arctic Convention Center, we can certainly gain a lot from their foresight as well as their insight into what's happening. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to start tonight by saying welcome to Mr. Shuman and to Mr. Jonas. Gentlemen, welcome.
Thank you.
Well,
Thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. And I want to start
night.
off.
Good night,
Sorry,
Joe. You kind of threw me off first when you said good night, Len, because my friends also call me Len, and you're talking to Leonard.
That is
Tim,
true.
how are you?
That is true. That is true. Well, let's get started. And I want to come right at you two tonight by asking for your comments and your reaction to something that I'm going to read to you, a statement that was made by one person who I think fancied himself as a very senior and seasoned politician in Guyana. And here is what he said, gentlemen. He said, as I was expecting an easy win for the coalition, I wrote in this column that the APNU AFC was heading for the Triple Crown. But which has not only surfaced, he's talking about the polls, rigging of the polls, glaring evidence of which has not only surfaced at the recount of the ballot cast, but could taint the credibility of the elections on the grounds of fraud. Among the claims are 1, ballots cast for dead and persons who have migrated; 2, persons voting without proper identification; 3, persons voting outside of their districts without employment contracts; 4, large numbers of improperly stamped ballots at locations where disciplinary service members voted; 5, missing poll books; 6, documents from one polling station being found in the ballot boxes of another. These words came out from Mr. Moses Nagamutu. Mr. Jonas, one of your colleagues at the bar, Mr. Nagamutu has made these statements, allegations of fraud. And Mr. Shuman, as of the last 2 days, we have also been told by senior members within APNU AFC of ballots that has taken flight from somewhere in region 10 to somewhere in region 4, as well, gentlemen, of the serious allegation that in every polling station, according to Ms. Valda Lawrence, in every polling station, every ballot box has had about 4 or 5 illegal ballots cast within them. Gentlemen, to you first, Mr. Shuman, your reaction, please.
Well, I was hoping you would have started with Tim, because I think Tim would have done a fantastic job at explaining all of those things over the last few days. But before we start into that, Yog, let me just say hi to Leonard. I kind of missed that in the start there, and hello to the viewers and listeners. Yeah, I think Tim would have done a fairly comprehensive job at describing why those things in themselves are near impossibility. Short of, sorry, bit dehydrated. Short of magic, I don't see how where in this world, in this real material world, that you could actually find any justification for anything that you just said there, emanating from the APNU FC, of course. Ballots taking flight, dead people voting, migrants not, let's say migrants voting who are not in the country. All of these things, and sometimes I chuckle a bit when I come on these shows. And I did the same thing when I was on Globespan some time back, because I think I'm listening to a very interesting comedy show, because of all of the accusations and stuff. It says nothing about the content nor the context of what we're doing. But when you hear of all of these things, all that one could think of is that you fell asleep and you woke up in this fantastic comedy show of which you're now a part of. Because we don't see any logical way in which any of these things could be proven. I go, and I want to take one specific thing. At 37 minutes after midnight last night, I received a call from one of my cousins in St. Cuthbert's, my community. His sister has been ill and in the community for well over 4 or 5 years. Hasn't left the community, has not migrated, hasn't been out and all of those things. And on that list of 172 that was given back to Madam Chair, her name is on there. So he called me last night because I called to ask his sister's status. And he called me just past midnight. He said, no, my sister hasn't moved from this community in over 5 years. But yet her name is on that list of 172. A few days back, I think it was 3 days back, I went into the media tent outside of the convention center. And I stated very explicitly that we have lost so much trust in our institutions that anything that comes out of the immigrations department or the police or any other ministry at this point has to be looked at with a great degree of scrutiny and suspicion. And no sooner said than done, they have simply proven that in their presentation of the 172. And I think Tim also elaborated on that point today when he spoke to the media. And I'm going to leave it there for now.
Thank you, Lennox. And just before I go to Tim, I just want to remind viewers and listeners that we have extended an invitation to everyone from all sides of the political space to appear in room 592. I have personally written letters, sent emails. Last week, for example, viewers and listeners, I know some of you are concerned about this. Last week, when we had the people from Burabis last week, Friday, Mr. Rafiq on this room 592, I had written to request permission to have Mr. Gobind Harbhajan on this show. I've written for permission to have Mr. Imran Khan in this room. We have not even gotten the courtesy of a response. And as well, invitations has been sent out to a number of other persons on the APNU AFC side. I know some of them are busy, and I respect that very much, but we have been continuously sending invitations for them to appear and to present their arguments to whatever is taking place. Tim, over to you, my friend.
I smiled when you mentioned one of the things that Walter Lawrence said, that in all of these polling stations, there is evidence of fraud by at least 2 or 3, and sometimes more, because there are 2,000 polling stations. Mm-hmm. And I ask myself, I've been genuinely trying to create a plausible scenario, a scheme in which I can compromise 2,000 polling stations without a whisper. And it can't be done. Somebody is going to be honest. In those 2,000 polling stations, if there are 5 reps from the various bodies, GCOM, APNU, PPP, International Observer, Local Observer, let's say 5 reps, you're talking 10,000 individuals. For there not to be a whisper, for none of them to talk to his wife. One of them talked to her husband, a brother, a sister, to say, you know, these people called me and asked me to do this thing. Not a whisper. It's such an impossibility. But then even the economics of it and the logistics of it. Am I going to go and bribe 5 people in a place of poll for 3 votes? And can I do that 2,000 times? And can I do that without anyone betraying me or saying no loudly or quarreling? And remember, of these people, half of them are APNU supporters. So did APNU so carelessly put their representatives in 2,000 places of poll, people of such low caliber, such low moral fiber, that they can be undermined by the opposition? Were APNU so careless in how they chose their reps? When I'm choosing my rep, I choose somebody I know loyal to me. It boggles the mind when you look at it that way, when you begin to try to implement a plan. And I genuinely think that in their attempt to sell a bridge, APNU made a mistake when they tried to locate the fraud not in 2 or 3 or 4 locations, but in 2,000. Because by trying to say to the people, these evil, horrible PPP folk had the wherewithal to infiltrate 2,000 locations and thought it was worthwhile to do it so they could get 3 votes in each of those locations, it simply doesn't make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Now, if we go back to 2015, I'm satisfied in my mind that in 2015, enough Guyanese, the independent thinking Guyanese, the Guyanese who will vote PPP one way and AFC APNO another way, not those who are blind party loyalists, but enough independent thinkers had enough of PPP management and corruption that they needed to swing over. The people who voted PPP in 2015 were willing to vote PPP despite 23 years of increasing corruption and increasing abuse. So those were the die-hard PPP core supporters.
Mm-hmm.
And even with that, APNU only won by less than 5,000 votes. Now, I live in this society, and I can say to you with a certainty that scores of people that I spoke to since 2015, and I'm one of them, I voted APNU in 2015, became disillusioned with APNU and decided they would not support APNU in 2020. I cannot think of one person, I have not come across a single person who said APNU has done such a good job that although I blindly supported PPP in 2015 and voted PPP, I've now changed my mind and I'm going over to vote APNU. APNU did not gain a single vote since 2015, but they lost many. And I'm astonished that Nagumutu can say to the public he expected a win. Nagumutu know full well. And they did deceive themselves, and they did G up themselves and say, we can do this. Think about it. Ask yourselves. You know people who voted APNU and said, no, boy, these people are not doing a good job. I come back, vote PPP, or like me, I can't vote for one of the 2 big parties. I'm going to create my own and try an independent route, as Lennox also has done. But how many Guyanese who voted blindly PPP in 2015, despite 23 years of increasing corruption, suddenly had a change of heart and said, APNU's done such a good job, they're going to vote APNU now?
Mm-hmm. Indeed.
It doesn't work.
And I think one of the other things that we need to bring out to the public here, gentlemen, is the fact that the numbers being thrown out. So they're in reality, they're questioning 200,000 votes. They're saying 200,000 votes are now suspect in a 450,000 votes ballot cast election. So, it boggles the mind. And Lennox, what Leonard and I have said consistently over and over here is that the APNU AFC, they have come to a stage where they're arguing with everybody that we ought not, we cannot lose these elections. And they're trying to convince themselves by repeating that lie over and over to say they cannot lose because the numbers and because of the dead people and they're refusing to accept they performed horribly. And when you perform horribly, you will be penalized by a continuously increasingly educated voter base. Your thoughts, Lennox?
I think one of the big things that we have to remember is since the loss of the no confidence motion in December of 2018, there has not been a single indication that that the APNU AFC have been willing to accept any circumstance, any single circumstance under which they would be unseated from office. When you look at the no confidence motion, Valda Lawrence wanted to have a recess mid-vote after Sharon has voted. And I can only venture a guess that maybe they want to have him replaced ad hoc. After that was done, they said, okay, well, we're going to accept this, and everyone accepted until Nigel Hughes threw the Jumbie math in there. And then they took this country, pretty much they dragged Guyana through the dirt for the entirety of 2019. They got to all of the courts, and the courts, while Madam Chief Justice would have ruled that it was properly passed, we saw some really interesting legal twisting in the Court of Appeal. It went to the CCJ, and even though that was presented in very explicit language, in my view, and I'm no lawyer, the administration said that, well, the CCJ said that, but the government has to remain in office, contrary to what the Constitution says. After that, they're supposed to have elections on the 18th of September, and they defer that to the Guyana Elections Commission, that Mr. Granger in himself had attempted to stack in the APNU's favor when you look at it with the appointment of Justice Patterson. And then you bring it down, and then they go into a house to house and claims and objections and every single thing. From the moment Mr. Granger started the appointment of Mr. Patterson, there was not going to be a single circumstance under which they were willing to accept a loss.
Mm-hmm.
When the results, when we started tabulations at Ashman's building, I was there. When they recognize that the numbers are not adding up, that's when the persons got sick, they got tired, that's when the flash drive came into play. And something very interesting happened in that room that a lot of people don't know. And it has not been given the public prominence that I think it deserves. When we got into that room, there was a young lady with a stack of papers. When you look at it, it contained all of the numbers from Region 4, all of the votes, number of voters in every single station. And when I drew attention to that, at the time, the commander of a division, Mr. Thomas, was there. I said, well, could you please tell us what those papers are in this young lady's hands? And she quickly disposed of it on top of a chest of drawers and went and laid on the ground. When they looked at it, it contained all of the voters. It didn't have votes cast or anything. It just had the voters per district, per box, and all of these things. Now, the suspicion that emanates out of that now is that there's only one way to cook the numbers. And since they were caught with that document, they didn't have a way to go back and now ensure that Mr. Mingo's cookbooks or cook spreadsheets in that sense were projected over the number of votes. So we kind of undermined their game there. So when they came back the next day, they were not disposed to that information right off the tip of their fingers to alter the math so that they could conceal their attempt at rigging the results. Right. By that interception in itself, we pretty much undermined a significant part of their game. That is why the next day when Mingo came, you could see clearly and you could hear it clearly that the numbers that he was calling out was not in line with the number of voters. And in some of those instances, you actually had more votes being cast than voters in some areas and so on.
Correct.
So out of all of that, we won, and we are going to do everything we can to delay our declaration of victory and all these things, not wanting to prove it, to getting to this point. And when we started this recount on the 6th, I think some of my opening remarks on that day, on the morning, was to say that the APNU AFC is not interested in a legitimate outcome of this process, that what they want to do now is to go and undermine the
Mhm. Seem to have a little connection issue there. And meanwhile, Mr. Shuman is coming back. I'm sure he's going to rejoin us. I want to go over to Mr. Jonas. Tim, as of recently, we are learning that one of your colleagues, Mr. Kisoon, seemed to be an alien, or he seems to be an illegal person existent in Guyana. But before you comment on it, sir, I want to ask you the following question. Leonard and I have posited an opinion that that Madam Claudette Singh may have written to Leslie James so that she could be educated. Because at the end of the day, you have consistently pointed out there's only one vote in this whole commission. That's her, because the six persons are obviously taken aside. So she is the only supposedly truly independent person. Sir, your comments on these things that are emerging over these last couple of days, and to ask you a specific question, sir. The ticked votes. APNU is calling out votes, and the commission's secretariat employee would say tick or untick. Is any one of you verifying the commission, the secretariat's word that indeed those were ticks? Because how do we of the public know that's not another Mingo sitting there, sir?
Well, before he comes on, Yog, I want to tell you that there's a statement that's coming out from the coalition now, which indicated that it never submitted the name of Devendra Kisoon on any of their lists as a person who was not in Guyana on the date of elections. That just came out.
Okay, but that Devendra Kisoon's serial number and details was in the list that they called out as part of their observation, as part of their allegations. That's where the Devendra Kisoon matter happened. Not of the 172 list, I think, but they're calling out 100 and something names or whatever amount of serial numbers, and that's how the Devendra Kisoon matter came up. Tim, over to you.
We're so far into Alice in Wonderland that this is just another pill that poor Alice in Wonderland swallows to be a giant or a midget. We are beyond the realms of all reality. We simply have lost sight of where we should be. When APNU agents in the workstation voice an objection to numbers, they don't voice the objection. They ask the GCOM official for information. So they will call out numbers of voters, not the names, the corresponding number. And I do not exaggerate when I say they will call out as many as 140 numbers.
Wow.
In a box. So I laughed the last time I was there. I said, man, why call out? Why not just call out everybody? Interestingly enough, on that occasion, the gentleman called out about 60 numbers, and only 5 were ticked according to GCOM. And at that point, I said, man, 5 isn't enough. Call out a couple more numbers. You might catch a couple more fish, because it is that arbitrary. And to answer your question about the arbitrariness, that calling out numbers and GCOM ticking is an exercise between the APNU agent and GCOM. Because when GCOM says, oh yes, number 157 is ticked, that was Dave Kisoon's number, we aren't permitted to see the book to confirm it was ticked. So that the whole transparency of the process, which involves the observers and the party reps being integral to the exchange and observing to see that, yes, this is reflected in the document, that's thrown out the window. We have asked, we said to the GCOM agent, we can't see your document. You're looking at your document to see, yes, this is ticked. Can we please look and confirm? No, can't do that. So this chain of custody, where APNU calls out numbers, of the 100 APNU calls out, GCOM says these 5 are ticked. We are not part of that and we can't see. And then the second stage, when APNO objects to those 5, they have no evidence to present to support their objection that these people are out of the country. And the GCOM official nevertheless takes the objection and refuses to note the basis of our objection that y'all didn't present no evidence. So the documentation is one-sided as a result of complicity. So when you look at an observation sheet, what has been written down has been written down in a process that is designed to exclude the voice of anybody except the APNO agent. But interestingly enough, even that doesn't withstand scrutiny, because then somehow that information translates to a letter from Justice Claudette Singh to the chief immigration man, who's also the commissioner of police, saying, please tell me if the names on this list that none of the other parties saw, and if you don't know if GCOM take them up or not, we don't know where these names come from, because there's no connection between that letter and what happens in the workstation, express or implied. Can you tell us if these people are in the country? Right. And he writes back to say, of your list of many, 172 people are not in the country. So again, we have no clue at this stage what the context this is in. And more laughably still, when you start looking at the 172, people are coming forward saying, man, here I am. There's an employee of an ANOC executive who's there. He said, here I am.
But he doubled down. He doubled down last night, didn't he? He doubled down to say, if you are so, you're illegal. I mean, how far will this go?
Well, Jog, this is the thing. What Mr. James sent to Claudette Singh is a computer printout to the list. What Mr. Mingo read in the Ashman's building is a computer printout to the list. We already know that Mr. Mingo's computer printout is totally fabricated. We have no knowledge whatsoever about the authenticity, truth, or not truth of what Mr. James said. We simply don't know. But we do know that poor Dave Kissoon did not come illegal backtrack through Brazil. Mr. Kissoon usually flies in through the appropriate channels. And we do know he was here at the second.
Correct. And I think also another member, one of the staff of AmCham is one of the latest persons to come forward, Leonard.
Yes, I'm hearing something like that. I have not been able to verify. And Devendra Kissoon is one of the founding members of AmCham.
But Devendra Kissoon, I think he came out of the observations being announced today. Sorry, go on, Leonard. Lennox.
Sorry, let me just interrupt you for a sec. The bandwidth on my computer is really slow, so I have attempted to log in with another device. I need your permission, please.
Please go ahead. Yes.
So I'm going to leave off one device and one.
Thank you. Yeah, so Leonard, we have another issue where a staff member of one of the local observer team, very visible, very much here, basically, and that person is on the list. That person has to be here illegally. I mean, the ridiculousness. But Tim, I want to ask you, and I want to come back to you on the perspective of, let us just say, hypothetically, at the end of this process, APNO does win these elections. How are we, the Guyanese people, after hearing of flying ballots and after hearing of massive corruption, because Guyanese brothers and sisters, for 5 persons to vote twice in any polling station means 5 persons would have had to go in twice into the. It means everybody was either dead or asleep. It means that the opposition, including Mr. Jonas's party and Mr. Lennox Shuman's party, it means they all bribed the policeman on duty, they bribed the polling officer on duty, they bribed the APNO agents on duty, they bribed the PPP agents, because we don't know who those persons voted for. You don't know who they voted for, but it means everybody in those polling stations were bribed and were asleep, or they were themselves alien at that stage. The ridiculousness is beyond. The numbers of being 10,000 persons being bought on election day. Now, Tim, how do we trust a police force that has all its officers being bribed on election day, how do we trust APNU that has all of its election agents bribed on that day? Where do we go from here, sir?
I think this is where it gets dangerous because our police force and armed services are being condemned by APNU and their leadership, and they're being thrown under the bus. In effect, APNU is saying to them, you are corrupt or you were asleep, you didn't do your job, you should have been there. That's the reason you voted a week early, so you could be there and make sure everything goes smoothly, and you've been compromised. And that is an enormous insult. Yeah, one compromised, yes. Two compromised, yes. 50, yes. But 2,000?
Correct.
In 2,000 places of poll, 2,000 APNU agents in 2,000 places of poll. That is where their story, I think, backfires on them, even with their own supporters.
Mm-hmm.
Because you do not treat your supporters like that. You do not
Correct.
insult your own people like that.
So,
if I was an APNU observer or supporter or representative, I would be offended.
Indeed. So, Mr. Jonas and Mr. Shuman, we got single-digit number of days to go, hopefully, for the close of the recount. God forbid nothing else comes in the way. What is your position presently looking ahead over the next 5 to 7 days? Lennox, you want to go first? You're muted. Please unmute your mic.
Yes. All right, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, I wanted to touch on something that Tim started into. I think every action that this administration has taken thus far has undermined the integrity and the confidence that we have had in the institutions that were meant to safeguard us as a society. And to touch back on the issue of the police and all of those things, it is a very dangerous position to put the country in, all just because you don't want to accept defeat. What you intend on doing is destroying the country and destroying the future generations. Not the future generation. It's not going to be one generation. It is a multiple generational issue, because when you start throwing to people, these followers in that sense, faithful followers, that they have been cheated out of something that they legitimately lost, that narrative is going to go on for the next 50 years, maybe even longer. When you start to talk about the police not doing their work, it becomes really, really difficult for the public to have confidence in that institution, that when a matter is brought before them, that it will be looked at within a legal context and objectively, or that it will even get the kind of attention that is warranted. So what is happening, or what has happened, is there's this massive undermining of these sacred institutions, in my view. In terms of what we could expect for the next few days, I would like to think, maybe it's the optimist in me, that we are going to go through this process and we'll see it to the end, because all eyes are on Guyana. Suriname just ran an election. It was executed within 3 days. They had the results. Some minor hiccups, but CARICOM gave them a clean bill of health. Right now, all eyes are on Guyana in this side of the hemisphere. Yes, our neighbors. But
Lennox, let me interject for one moment. But CARICOM, everybody, not just CARICOM, gave us a clean bill of health on March the 3rd. Even Madam Claudette Singh, Mr. Granger, Mr. Basil Williams, they're all on record saying these elections were free and fair and properly held and above the board.
Correct, but they spoke about the process, about the integrity of the process, and that is what Tim was talking about earlier in terms of how good of a process we have, but it does not speak to the integrity of the results. We have not yet received that clean bill of health in terms of the results that we are getting or we have gotten. Everyone has talked about the tabulation of Region 4. And what I'm hopeful will happen within the next few days with all eyes, even though we have only the CARICOM team here, I will tell you that the Canadian government has someone there present every single day. And the Americans have intermittent eyes in there, but I'm sure that they have a lot more intelligence coming out of those stations than we care to acknowledge. So the entire Western Hemisphere, their eyes are focused electorally on Guyana and what's happening. And with that in play, I don't know that there is room for the APNO AFC to do anything that would undermine the process, because if they do, they face some serious consequences. Of course, those are all for logical thinkers like you and myself on the panel here. But we know that when it comes to logic, there's nothing logical about the AP and UAFC at this point. It is just a matter of desperation, and they're going to hang on until their entire skin peels off, their nails peel off, and then the last person is going to still stand there and say, "We won these elections." I don't know how they could justify that.
Thank you, Lennox. Over to you, Tim.
Um, there's a reason that we're in this predicament, and we have to bear it in mind because we have to look forward. Lennox is right. Um, there's been an attempt to rig this election that has been exposed. There's a lot of kicking and screaming going on now, but we're actually at a critical moment because, and again, this is GCOM that I think is responsible. Whereas we should have been counting these regions in order, GCOM has actually completed 8, 9, and now 10. 4 still going on. GCOM has allowed 4 to be the last region counted. And with what we will be going into in the next few days is the areas of hot contention where Mingo did his magic. So as we get to the east coast of Region 4 of Demerara, there we will see a lot of discrepancies between what the recount shows and what Mingo did. Um, so we are in for some tough times. And in fact, if this process is to be interrupted, now is the time that I see it being done. If there's a motive to interrupt, the time is now. So we need to be careful over the next few days. But we need to look forward. And let us assume that the incumbent is sufficiently afraid of sanctions and the GCOM is sufficiently backed into a corner that it can no longer try to avoid the inevitable. That doesn't help Guyana because our winner-take-all situation and our so-called democratic process gives the advantage to the party whose demographic ethnic base is larger, and that is the PPP. And in any forum where there are 51 of you and 49 of me, simply because of how you look, we do not have a fair democracy. And it's really time for our conversation to change. And I really regret APNU's approach now. Because APNU should have been talking about this from 2015. You don't win an election by 4,500 votes and then pretend you're God, pretend that you're King David. Ethnically cleanse the public service, give yourself 50% pay rise, parade people like Ashley Singh and Winston Brassington in handcuffs and shackles for the amusement of the masses. You don't do that kind of thing. You start a truly inclusive conversation with the intention of creating a system where the two large groups that each one feels disenfranchised when the other one wins are comfortable, where every group in Guyana is comfortable that they are fairly and adequately represented in the government. Nothing like that was done. APNU won on that platform. I voted for them and I forgave AFC for breaking their promise about staying as an independent third party because they campaigned on a platform of constitutional reform where everybody would get to share in decision making, share in governance. And they broke that promise, second promise they broke. When you win by 4,500 votes and you pretend that you're suddenly a monarchy and you'll never come out, imagine David Granger had the audacity to present to the public a 10-year plan of advancement with oil and gas.
Right.
Need
Leonard,
inclusive governance, where
Yes.
both sides are represented, where all sides are represented.
Indeed. Leonard, I know you have to be very open, and
Yes.
you are not to have an opinion, sir. But Leonard, I'm going to ask you a question. What do you see over the next 3 to 4 days?
That's a good one.
Okay, you don't have to answer me, but go ahead with your question, sir.
Yeah. I was just about to say that I'm not supposed to be sitting on that side of the fence.
Danny, I can't hear you. I'm sorry. I don't know if something's wrong with your mic.
Yes, my apologies. I know that Yog wants me to sit on the other side, but I'm not going to sit there. I'm not going to fall into his trap. However, I'm going to put you two gentlemen for this questions, and I want you to answer. Are you prepared for the eventualities that maybe the coalition is not going to accept, or let's say the other side wins? Whichever side wins, are you prepared that one side is not going to accept and we're going to see ourselves in another crisis? Do you have a game plan to deal with that? Anybody?
Let's just say, Lennox, you want to go first on that?
Okay. Sorry, I'm a little bit dehydrated still, but drinking water. From every indication at this point, Leonard, what we have seen is that all of the numbers are in the People's Progressive Party's favor. I think right now their lead on this recount is about 18,000. So it make it less, based on the numbers that we're seeing, it makes it less likely that the PPP would accept anything than their earned victory. In the eventuality that the APNU AFC does not accept that, do we have a game plan? At this point, we don't have the kind of resources to go into any prolonged battle. If we were to go into another election, we don't have the resources to do that. So for us, we are going to have to put our knives and daggers or swords or muskets or our dictionary wherever we feel it would make the most difference for Guyana, because we don't have the resources for a protracted court battle or anything of that sort. Whether or not the APNU AFC accepts it, that's a completely different story. Once again, there is nothing logical about what they're doing. If there is one thing that we could predict, is that they're not willing to accept any formula that says that they would have lost these elections, anything. So that is the only thing that seems predictable.
Right.
In my view.
Tim, just before I ask you to answer that question, let me just add this part B to it. The truth is that given GCOM's past and current performance, one do not know when GCOM could be ready for another elections. And this must be one of the strategies APNU AFC has in mind. If they're to say they want to hold on to power, it might be indefinitely. Over to you, sir.
That's not an option, either legally or practically. GCOM's job is to declare a result. There's no situation contemplated by the drafters of our constitution that allows GCOM to say we've conducted an election and we want to do it again. This isn't like the umpire in cricket who said, sorry, I didn't see the play, please play it over. It doesn't work like that. Either you're out or you're not out. And GCOM have got to decide one way or another. Now, one of the benefits, maybe, of our timidity as a people is that I really don't see a scenario where either party, and PPP don't have the traction to do it, so it would have to be defy GCOM, defy a declaration by Claudette Singh, and say, we're calling out the army. I don't even think they can do that. And we're staying in here. You see, once GCOM declares, they send their report to the Chancellor with instructions that the Chancellor must swear in the winner. So GCOM has to declare, and the chancellor, who is a professional, will not swear in somebody without instructions from GCOM. So the test is GCOM. The incumbent cannot pretend to continue as president if the chancellor swears in on the instructions of GCOM, Mr. Irfan Ali. And therefore, it all turns on Claudette Singh's vote when these reports are presented to her. The whole of Guyana knows what the matter is going to be. APNU is not even pretending anymore that they've won the count of these ballots. They're not pretending that. What they're trying to do is undermine the credibility of the process. So we know who won. We know who will end up with more votes.
And
But
what
it turns
happens?
out
What happens
it's
if
one.
Claudette Singh doesn't vote, and it goes 3-3?
No, that also is not an option. As the casting vote, her sole function as chairman is to be that casting vote. So if she abdicates that sole function, then she has abdicated her function as chairman. She has to vote. You don't abstain in GCOM.
Okay, and I think, Timothy, a lot of the professionals, yours truly included, I do believe that at the end of the day, Madam Claudette Singh might have done everything to, she seemed to be reluctant. She seemed to be taking a long time to make decisions, and she certainly seems to be distancing herself from being a proactive chairman, like what we have got used to in the past. But I think that at the end of the day, I'm hoping that she would vindicate herself and all the criticism that would have come at her feet, and do what, as you rightly say, she's required to do by law. But Tim, let me come back to you on one other aspect. Will these, what if the recount is not allowed to be completed?
Well, again, by locating the remainder of ballots front and center in those areas where Bingo's suspicions are highest, the plan also is double-edged, because to interrupt the process now, when we have seen unequivocally that every single other region counted their ballots properly and acted with absolute professionalism and integrity, we now focus our attention on the Mingo area. And if an attempt is made to interrupt the process now, it doesn't dilute the suspicion. It confirms the suspicion. It corroborates the suspicion. I think it would be a monumental mistake for APNU to try to stop the process now, by whatever means, COVID or whatever means, because attention is now focused, of locals, of foreigners, of everybody, on the Mingo areas. This doesn't dilute the blame and where the aspersion is cast. This focuses it.
Correct.
I want to go back to what you said about the chairman, Claudette Singh. This has been an unprecedented election. This has been something I've never read or heard of. This entire torturous process, both the legalities and the technicalities, and the individual corruption undermining it. She has the option, by doing the right thing, of being an international hero, of being someone who has piloted GCOM through troubled waters, through threats and bullyism, through mutual suspicion and distrust, and arrived at the right conclusion, which will be vindicated on an election petition. She can be a hero. She can be a Guyana Nelson Mandela. Or she can be a pariah, both locally and internationally. I want to make that point because she is a lady whose professional history and reputation has been intact. I have appeared before her as counsel before a judge. I have known her after she retired. I appeared before her when she was promoted to the Court of Appeal. And she has always stolidly done a day's work. She has never shirked. And her reputation for that was inviolable. That can be shattered and torn apart, or it can be elevated wonderfully. And the choice really is hers.
Great. So coming back to the same last scene, sorry, go on.
Yog,
Yes.
I want to get in there for a quick sec. There is this when we started this recon process, there was this drive to have Region 4 completed, and I think at one point I myself bought into that since that was the only point in question. But from where we're sitting as a country in such a charged environment politically and ethnically, you take a step back, you take a day to think on it. And in order to satisfy both sides, because the APNO AFC is calling for a full recon, PPP is calling only for Region 4, why not say, all right, well, look, let's get it all done because Region 4 is encompassed in that full recon. And in the start, it was, all right, well, can we get Region 4 done first? But when you think of it, Madam Chair has shown a great degree of wisdom in saying, look, we are going to do it in this order, and Region 4 is going to be counted with everything else while the rest of them are going, and rightly so, because if we had completed Region 4 first, there would have been a potential to enrage the population whereby one house would say, well, look at that, Region 4 has just proven that we've won. And right away, you undermine the entire recount process. Remember, you're relying on these numbers to declare the winner. Now, if you undermine this process somewhere in the middle after you would have done Region 4, and you never get to the very end to have the legitimate numbers coming out of this recount that all of us sign on to, then what now do you take to declare? Because people would just chuck in and become complacent, and who knows, we may have opened up a separate can of worms in that sense.
Yes.
But I want to touch on something else that Madam Chair would have done. My understanding, and maybe Tim could correct me being the legal mind, is that the Secretariat's function is the execution of the decisions made by the Commission in line with the laws. Madam Chair and the Commission should not be engaged in the everyday activities and dictating to the Commission what needs to be done, what must be done. And I think by virtue of her not accepting the results from Mingo, would have demonstrated the kind of integrity that she has. A lot of people are quick to heap scorn and blame on Madam Chair. But the reason why we are in this recount right now are because of two sets of people. One of them being Madam Chair herself, because she had made that commitment to this undertaking. And the second one is that the newer parties collectively, all of us worked very, very diligently. When we left Ashman's building for that very first press conference that we had, all of us, inclusive of the PPP, had we not done that, the international community at one point just looked at these elections as a war between blacks and Indians in Guyana, and they were willing to just say, you know what, it's done. But it is because of the presence of the newer parties that brought us to this point where we're hopeful that we could get results of integrity. And I think Madam Chair in herself, in what she has done, I don't think she has shown that she is willing to falter and put that stellar career to the wayside. I think what she has done is made very circumspect decisions in line with laws. And I think going forward, I cannot see that she's going to falter in her decision to this and her commitment to this process and this country.
Well, Lennox, I think your point about one in hindsight, one of the things that come out with having Region 4 done in the way done, the regions done in the way it's done, makes sense. I would want to disagree with you with the second point you made. Had the Madam Chairman, had the Commission been engaged as they ought to be engaged in the process from day one, Guyana would have presently been paying heed to the people who are sick and dying in this country, people who are unattended to in this country because of COVID-19. Instead, we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars in a recount that ought not to have happened in the first place. So some of the blame has to be directly on the plate of the chairman. But, we are, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we are down to program time. I want to leave the last words to Mr. Timothy Jonas.
However, let me say to everyone out there, like our two gentlemen on the program tonight, our two guests, I want to encourage everyone. Be patient. Let's wait for the outcome, but be vigilant, because it is especially the new party's vigilance that has made and has given democracy a continuing chance. Had it been just PPP and PNC, we might not have gotten this far. So that is excellent. And I want to congratulate you two gentlemen and all the new parties for doing what you're doing. Ladies and gentlemen, before I hand over back to the two of them for the final word, I want to remind all of you, join me tomorrow night again and Mr. Gildari for a discussion with Mr. Ruel Johnson. Those of you who would remember Mr. Ruel Johnson under his previous wings of a mosquito crew, we'll certainly be talking with him tomorrow, and he will be in the hot seat. So over to, I think, Lennox, you wanted to make a final point?
Yes, I wanted to. And Yog, thank you so much. Leonard and Glenn, Tim, and all the viewers. I want to ask of the public that all of us who are working in the Arthur Chung Convention Center to ensure that our franchise, our collective franchise, is respected and properly counted, accounted for, and everything else, that you help us. And how do you do that? The little words of support that go out to agents and political parties and so on, objective obviously, and non-demeaning, non-racial, that they continue to come and do keep an eye for suspicious activity. I think coming down to the very end, right now, we obviously have to bring our A game, starting from tomorrow night. If we didn't do it all the way up to now, starting tomorrow when we start to zoom in on those Mingos boxes, we are going to need every single person attending there with their A game to ensure that nothing out of the ordinary happens. And I just want to say thanks to all the supporters who supported us through this process.
Thank you, Lennox. And Tim, we got 2 minutes to go. The final words are yours, sir.
Thanks, Joe. Lennox took credit to the small parties for saving the day. I don't think that's fair. I think that it would have been a done deal without the third parties. But more importantly is the international community. The bully in the schoolyard didn't care about the PPP and certainly didn't care about ANOG and LG. We have no traction. But it was the pressure from the Americans, the Canadians, and the Europeans that brought in CARICOM and Mayamati saved us. Now, the reason I'm saying that is that I agree with the second thing that I've said, that the next few days are critical, because the next few days we are looking at the region for Mingo areas. And I hope, I know we've seen some of the international observers, CARICOM there and a couple of the others, not enough, but I really hope to see the Americans, the Canadians, the Europeans in there showing a presence, because this is crunch time and this is when it's going to get hot. And we need as many eyes there, and they continue to be accredited. And I would like to see them there. I hope I can persuade them to come, because they are the ones who need to see with their own eyes, to eyeball the situation, so that they can draw their conclusion and not listen to a spin or a narrative. I really hope to see them. It is crunch time and we need them there.
Thank you. And ladies and gentlemen, thank you. We are out of program time. See you tomorrow. Do stay safe. And if you can, say a prayer for this country of ours. Good night now.
Good night.
Kite Radio.
Covering Guyana from coast to coast.
Demerara and Essequibo 99.1 FM.